In this video, in the top-down or bottom-up series, we start to explore consciousness. The study of consciousness is one of the hottest topics in science and philosophy today. Many are trying to understand what it is, where it comes from, and what it means for our understanding of our world and ourselves. For most of the scientific age, which began to emerge with Galileo, Newton, and others in the 17th century, consciousness has largely been ignored. It was as if it didn't exist. There's a good reason for this, and the French philosopher and scientist René Descartes recognized this. The world was beginning to be seen as mechanistic. That is, everything seemed to be following a specific course set by completely reliable laws. This started with understanding that the Earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around. It really got going with Newton's gravity. Now the sun was no longer pulled by a Greek god in a chariot across the sky, nor was it due to the active involvement of a creator god. Rather, the Earth orbited the sun as the moon orbited the planets. All followed orbits required by the law of gravity, a law which could be described mathematically. As more of the known universe succumbed to the idea of something like a machine or a mechanical clock, where was the room for the mind, a soul, or consciousness? Our own individual experience of what it is like to be us, to experience the world around us, to have our own unique, unshareable thoughts, to think about ourselves thinking, that was not mechanical. It didn't seem to fit. There were no apparent laws that one could point to and say, this determines our thoughts and feelings. Could my thought of a giraffe eating a chocolate ice cream cone right now be set by the initial conditions of the universe 13.8 billion years ago? Descartes was one of the most important pioneers in this new way of thinking of a mechanical universe. Everyone in his time knew that the mind, or soul, existed. In fact, Descartes himself said, because we think, we know that we exist. That makes it pretty fundamental, which means we have to start with that. So to deal with the quandary, Descartes said mind and matter are two separate things. Matter conforms to the laws of nature. Mind is something entirely different. It was a wonderful boost to science because it left complete freedom for the idea that was already emerging, an idea called determinism. This said, if all matter operates on the basis of cause and effect like billiard balls being hit by a cue ball, then if we know what happens at the very beginning, we can know everything there is to know about the universe. All can be predicted. All is set in stone. The initial conditions determine everything. Science, until about 100 years ago, proceeded with this basic agreement or understanding. But along the way, something happened to Descartes' big idea of separating mind from matter. This idea, called dualism, ran smack into the basic idea that came to dominate science. That idea is called materialism or physicalism. Because scientists were so good at uncovering the basic laws of nature, and because everything seemed to operate in a clockwork, deterministic fashion, it was natural to conclude that everything fit in this understanding, everything. Scientists and philosophers decided that only matter and the forces that affect them are real. Since they could not conceive of how something that isn't matter, like a mind or thoughts or observations, could possibly have any effect on the physical world of matter and forces, then it simply meant those things didn't exist. Science, according to the physicalists, has already proved there was no need for a creator God in the universe. Now it was obvious there was also no possible evidence for minds or for souls. But there was still consciousness. How do we account for the fact that we are conscious and know that we are conscious? In the dominant physicalist way of thinking, this dilemma meant that either we are being duped into thinking we are conscious, that consciousness is just an illusion, or that somehow our brains create consciousness. Some philosophers today still hold to the first of these ideas. Philosophers such as Daniel Dennett, Patricia and Paul Churchland, and Georges Ray are called eliminativists because they eliminate mind or consciousness as a possibility. Their commitment to the physicalist belief system cannot conceive of anything as immaterial as thoughts. For others, and this includes most in science and philosophy today, it seems obvious that since we know our thoughts and feelings and experiences are real, they must be generated by the brain. Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of DNA, set about showing how the brain produces consciousness. Multiple millions of dollars have poured into research into neuroscience, much focused on finding what are called the neural correlates of consciousness. Our brains process information coming from our senses using electrochemical exchanges between neuron cells. So, if we could find which cells trigger conscious thoughts, we could discover how the brain produces consciousness, or so they thought. But the more scientists have dug into this question, the harder it appears to become. Australian philosopher David Chalmers in 1995 famously called it the hard problem. He meant that neurons processing activity like maintaining our heart rate or stimulating adrenal glands or keeping us in balance when we're not thinking about it are the easy problems. They are not easy for sure, but much harder is to account for how this 3-pound gelatinous substance of wet cells we carry between our ears can produce the rich and varied experiences we call consciousness. That's more or less where we are today. We have a very wide range of answers to the question of consciousness. Some say it is an illusion. Some say that even though we have not yet come close to finding out how the brain produces it, given enough time and research funds, we will get there. Others say Descartes was right. The mental and material are two different things. Others, such as leading neuroscientist Christoph Koch, Francis Crick's early collaborator, say that because consciousness is real and emerges from matter, it must be inherent in matter, a part of everything that exists. This idea, now adopted by many, is called panpsychism. Others think that consciousness or mind is the only thing that is real, and that our experience of the material world is just an aspect of consciousness. This idea in various forms is often called idealism. It is advocated by scientist and philosopher Bernardo Kastrup and scientist and Dr. Robert Lanza, among others. Still others, such as William James and Carl Jung, say that there is a universal consciousness that we all participate in. It is from this that the material world emerges, or consciousness and the material world emerge from a unity that lies beneath both and is foundational to each. Pioneering quantum physicist Wolfgang Pauli worked with psychoanalyst Carl Jung on this approach called dual aspect monism. In upcoming videos, we will explore these ideas. The question of consciousness is fundamental to the top-down or bottom-up question we are asking in this series of videos. Does consciousness show that we and our universe are intended? Or does it lend credence to the idea that all is an accident, just a freak and unexplainable consequence of the laws of nature? Each of the ideas explored will help us answer the critical top-down or bottom-up question.